Was Brandon able to join?
Not at this point. Oh, okay.
Yes, I just admitted him.
Okay, so Stephen, whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, no time like the present. Good morning, everybody. We're going to call to order the May 21st, 2020 meeting of the Design and Historic Review Commission. I have 10:02 a.m. Obviously, we are meeting under COVID-19 circumstances, so this is being done via Zoom. In that interest, the public was notified that if they had public comment, they needed to let us know. We had none, so we won't be seeing any public comment except possibly from the applicants that are here this morning. First order of business is the consent agenda, which consists entirely of consideration and approval of the February 20th, 2020 DHRC meeting minutes. Hopefully everybody got those in your email, had a chance to look over those. If anybody has any questions or corrections, now would be the time. Otherwise, we'll entertain a motion to approve those as written.
Make a motion to approve.
Okay, we might have the person who made the motion raise your hand, so it's easier to.
I'll second the motion.
Okay. Everybody have a chance to get that? Okay, all in favor, raise your hand, please. Okay, so that passes. Moving on to the regular agenda. We have a request for downtown district approval for building facades located at 1 East Tuig Avenue and 202 South Chadbourne Street that include the repainting of the first floor facades to red to match the upper floors, replacing the second and third floor canopies and adding 2 new canopies to match the existing building trim, and removing the beige limestone band above the first floor of the south building approved with RCC 17-17 /CA 17-01. And with that, I will turn it over to city staff to make your recommendation.
Okay, and just before I begin, Ray, you'll have to allow me to share my screen. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Everybody see that okay, the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Excellent, okay. So our case today, it's going to be 2 cases, and I'm going to do this as a single presentation because they relate to the same properties. So 1 East Tuig, which is the north property, and 202 South Chadbourne, which is the south property. These are both historical designated properties, so they need a certificate of appropriateness. And they're also in our downtown corridor district, which used to be the river part of the river corridor. It's now called the downtown district. So those are the 2 cases that we're going to discuss today. 1 East Tuig and 202 South Chadbourne district, 3 Harry Thomas's district in the downtown neighborhood, and it's in the CBD Central Business District zoning. So this is the north property looking from Chadbourne, and this is the south property. So in 2017, the south property was received a river corridor and certificate of appropriateness. They painted it red, and they had plaster moldings on the front with some decorative elements, and they repainted it red to match the historical precedents of that building. And I'll go over some of the historical photos in a minute. And I thank you to the applicants for that, providing a lot of those photos. We had some of them, but we didn't have all of them here. The north building was actually redone in the early 90s before the River Corridor Commission and River Corridor Ordinance was passed. So a lot of those improvements were already done. So let's go over in a minute what the improvements are. This is looking on the north side of the 1 East Tuig building. So basically, we're looking at several things today. The first is repainting all of the first floor red so that it will match the 202 building. So all of this will become red. You can see the old color has already been started to be painted over. The applicant had called me and recognized that they did need an approval for this, so they're coming in to do that. The second feature is the canopies that are green here are going to be replaced with striped canopies. Also, to go back to historical precedents, the colors are going to be different, but they are going to match a lot of the historical color palette and some of the colors in the area and on the trim elements. 2 smaller canopies will be placed over the windows of 202. So you're going to have the replacement of these 4 green canopies with the multi-striped, and then 2 smaller multi-striped canopies, same coloring over here. The final change is going to be the trim elements that you see here. This off-white color will be a darker tan, and then the trim around that off-white will be kind of a goldish color, and the applicant will, after I'm done presenting, we'll probably go over that in further detail. The final change, the 4th, is removal of this limestone band that was never created here. When they approved the 2017, there was, see this color here, this was just going to continue along over here. They're deciding not to do that at this time. So that needs to be removed because it was a requirement of the 2017. So those are the changes. Looking quickly over the historical buildings, and again, thank you again to the applicants for these great photos. This was originally a Ruffini buildings in the early 1900s. So this was 1906. And then the larger picture here in 1911, you can see they had these original metal canopies that were overhanging. All of the buildings were painted red and all of them were a brick exterior in 1911. In the 1920s, they made some changes. The big metal canopy that went around here was removed. They added some smaller fabric striped canopies. So the applicant's kind of going back to that 20s look in that respect. And in the 1930s, I can't see the photo over here, but at least 1 West Twohig was repainted that lighter color that you now see on the building that they want to change to red. In the 50s, there was metal elements, some new doors and windows that were added to the buildings. And I believe it pretty much stayed that way throughout time. I think sometime between the 50s and the 90s, this building was also reconstructed with plaster and concrete at the front. And then in the 90s, when the current applicant bought the buildings, they also did plaster moldings over here. So that's what's out there today since the 90s, and with that lighter color. In 2007, this picture shows that they added the canopy. So again, they kept the plaster moldings. Everything the 2nd and 3rd floor brick stayed the same. They just added the canopies. And you can see this building was redone, and they had knocked out that brick originally. So in 2017, this building here received an approval. The only difference that you're seeing here is that they have repainted over the trim elements with slightly darker colors, but all of it was repainted red. They added a parapet here that kind of stepped up, and the limestone band that was not installed but was supposed to. So they're going to ask for the removal of that. One other small thing, it was not part of the original approvals in the 90s, but this 1 East Twohig, I understand they want to just remove that addressing just because this is all now part of one building and just take that away. So I guess so people aren't confused. So that's 2020, and that's what it looks like today. So what they're proposing to do, I've described a little bit. Remove the green canopies with the stripe colored canopies and add 2 more over here. So that's number 1. 2 is go with a little bit darker coloring on the trim. So this will called Sands of Time. It's kind of a goldish color. Travertine is kind of a beige, and then the terracotta is basically the red. So all the first floor would all be repainted red to match the upper floors. Replace the canopies, add the trim elements, and don't put the limestone band. And this is looking on the Twohig side. So there's no canopies on the Twohig side. They're not changing that or adding any. So it's just repainting the first floor red and the darker colors on the trim elements. Staff is recommending approval for the following reasons. Repainting from beige to the original red on the first floor is consistent with the historical precedent that lasted until between the 1930s and 50s. The new colors for the trim and decorative elements are also consistent with historical precedents and in the historical color palette. A lot of the early 1900s buildings had a lot of the same coloring. On the canopies, the multi-stripe canopies, you just saw the pictures go back to the 1920s design. So that's fairly historical. The colors will be generally consistent, again, with historical precedents and with the trim on the building, which will also have that gold and beige color. And finally, the limestone band removal. We believe that with the stepped parapet that they've added, there's also 2 stripe bands here that continue to exist. That gives enough differentiation on the building and breaks up that wall expanse sufficiently without the limestone band. Looking at all the pictures from 1906 when the buildings were constructed up until now, there was never a limestone band on that location on the building. So staff was in support if they wanted to construct it or if they didn't want to construct it. We were okay either way. We think that the 2017 approval though is sufficient as it is. So that concludes the downtown district review. Just moving quickly over the certificate of appropriateness. Basically, there's 10 criteria, as you know, from other cases. And it's basically, is it historical? Does it preserve the original elements? And are any changes over time also reflected and still in keeping with the historical design? So we believe that it achieves both. They went with the original red paint on the building, red coloring. So that's consistent with the original design. The trim elements, the colors that were added later are still reflective of the color palette and what could have been done in the early 1900s up until the 20s. So even the changes over time, like adding the striped canopies in the 20s, is still reflective. So, we believe preserve the historical elements. There is a historical basis, significant with the changes over time. If the canopies were removed, it should not create any damage to the existing building. The canopies will be in the same place on one East Huig as what was there before. And there's no archaeological features that we know of. And that concludes staff's presentation. Any questions or comments? Actually, let me just read the two conditions of approval. It'll be the same for both cases. So the colors, dimensions, and materials of the building and canopy shall be consistent with the renderings approved by the DHRC. Any minor deviations may be approved by the Planning Development Services Director. And finally, the applicant shall obtain building permits for the new canopies from permits and inspections. So that concludes our presentation.
Okay, great. Do any of the commissioners have questions for staff? And if not, now, as I mentioned, nobody had applied for public comment, but do the applicants want to speak to the commission at this point?
I would like to. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you, but that's okay.
Okay, I'm using my smartphone and
Gotcha.
my name is Bob Post and I'm one of the partners of One East Huig Partnership. And just to give you a kind of a story of what's going on here is the One East Huig building. First off, it was redone in 1985 by Monarch Tile. They did a major renovation of the building in 1985. And then our partnership bought it in late 1993. And in 1994, we renovated some of the walls inside the building and just repainted the outside from a gray to a more of a taupe color. That's the only change we made. Right now, the building is utilized by 10 attorneys on the second and third floors and by Guarantee Abstract and Title Company on the first floor. And they need more space. So we bought the building at 202 South Chadburn to expand Guarantee Abstract and Title into it. And we've constructed a couple of corridors that connect the two buildings. And our desire was to make the two buildings look as much as possible like they were one building. And that's why we're trying to be consistent. And then, of course, we want to be somewhat consistent with historical looks. And our final colors that we've put in this application were recommended by Donna Crisp, who we have retained to help us with our color schemes. And so that's just the background for it. That, unless you have any questions, that's all I have.
Great. Okay, anything else? Anybody?
Well, I would like to thank you for what you do. This is an Oscar Ruffini building, and it's one of his best, and I think a treasure to our community. So feel strongly about trying to preserve that historic look and And then with your work on other buildings, our city should be great. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for participating in the process and for your investment in downtown San Angelo. To both of you. So unless there's any questions, we'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion for approval. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, if you'll raise your hand on camera.
Second.
Okay. All right, any opposed, same sign. So that passes unanimously.
And who made that motion and who seconded it? If you'd raise your hand.
Clay made the motion.
Clay made the
Dave Duffy
motion.
seconded it.
Okay.
Its renderings are beautiful. Nice job.
Thank you.
Great to get the history on the building too.
Very nice.
Great. All right, at this time, do we have a division report?
I don't think we have anything today. I guess one thing I'd like to let you guys know is currently the governor's orders that allow us to have Zoom meetings are set to expire June 12th. That being said, he has extended them a couple times, but we will not know if this next meeting will be a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting until the Friday before. So please, you know, Shelley will be in contact with you as much as possible, but just please be aware this next one may be in person or it could be a Zoom. We just don't know until the Friday before. So.
Okay. Then under announcements, barring an extension from the governor, the next regular meeting of the DHRC is scheduled to begin on Thursday, June 18th, 2020 at 10 in the East Reception Room of City Hall, 72 West College Avenue. And we will adjourn the meeting. Thanks everybody for attending and doing your part.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you.